Kimberly Hayes-Muga.
And I'm Amanda Day.
And you're listening to Fundraising HayDay,
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
And how we can all do a better job of changing the world through philanthropy. Because the world is changing, y'all.
Yes, it does. Special thanks to our Patreon subscribers who help make this podcast possible. To join this amazing community with monthly playlists, a book club, wide open mistakes were made, and Kimberly's monthly musings, visit patreon.com/fundraising HayDay.
If you've been looking to level up your grant skills on your own schedule, on your own time, because no one's going to put you in a corner and tell you what to do, hey, check out HayDay Services on-demand courses. We've got a 12-module grant writing audio course and a 12-module grant management course. Each of those little modules is like 20 to 30 minutes, so you can sneak in extra training when it makes sense for you. The price per module is only $19.99, and you can buy one or you can buy the whole series. Mm-hmm. We would love for you to visit haydayservices.com/shop and check it out.
Yep. So when Kimberly and I were planning the lineup of episodes for season 9, which we're in the middle of right now, I realized we had never in our series of 175 plus episodes talked about organizational audits. So clearly that needed to be rectified, which is why we're talking about single versus regular audits today after a quick word from our sponsor. Y'all, we are so very excited to introduce our listeners to the first season 9 sponsor of the Fundraising HayDay podcast. Grant Guru is the world's largest aggregator of grants and funding, and this incredible prospect research tool has made its way all the way from Australia to the United States. It's a searchable database that is updated daily, and it is so user-friendly. We're joined today by Adrian Spencer, co-founder and director of Grant Guru, to learn more about this incredible product with a mini-series during the first 12 episodes of this season. Adrian, we've really been on a roll these last few episodes talking about some of the features that Grant Guru provides. So let's keep up with that and talk about the management aspect in Grant Guru. What systems do you all make available for keeping track of all the potential grant opportunities that users have found when they're using your system? Because it's one thing to find them, but then you got to keep track of it all.
Yeah. Finding the right grant is not the end, if only. But managing priorities and processes is the key. We sat down with lots of our users and they told us all the things that they wanted. So we've built some tools. We've got a dashboard to help with that. You can create multiple lists for different clients or projects or sectors, whatever you want. The dashboard lets you manage that, puts everything into a calendar, lets you assign priorities. Is this grant a must-have, or is it urgent, or is it just nice to get? And then you can start to list your grants by those priorities, or the size, or the closing date, or whatever's relevant or important to you or your clients. We've got basic workflow in there. You can track progress. You can manage where you're up to, especially if you're doing multiple applications. And then for the more larger or sophisticated users, we've got functions to help teams run so that they can manage multiple submissions and know who's doing what without that problem that you often have with people lodging separate applications and not having coordinated what they've done. So we don't just want you to find the grant. We want to help you plan and manage the next steps so that you are successful with winning those grants.
Yeah, I love that it's more than a search engine, right? It's also a management system to make sure that you're meeting your deadlines and getting the work done. That's
got to manage that workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Find out more about this fantastic new resource for grant seekers. Visit grantguru.com/US. You get access to a user-friendly search engine, email alerts, grants calendar, customizable grant reports, and so much more.
And as an added bonus, Grant Guru is providing our listeners with 20% off their subscription. So when you go to make your purchase, use the discount code HayDay963. That's HayDay 963.
Amanda, I just love a good audit. Said no one. No one ever said that. I'm lying. No one ever said that.
What, you mean people don't live for audits? But even so, audits are certainly important, right? So, Kimberly, do you have an audit memory or maybe something you'll never forget from your audit experience?
So when I want to say when I'm talking about audits in this sense, we're not talking about the IRS coming in, the Attorney General, the Office of Inspector General, whoever busting down your door. I'm talking about just regular audits. And much like regular checkups with your doctor, it's not something you're like, woohoo, I get to go get checked by my doctor on an annual basis. But unlike going to a physical exam by your doctor, you are clothed. I was certainly always clothed for these audits. And I would also say it was more like I know this audit team from an external CPA firm. I know what they're going to do. And they're going to ask for something that I don't have. And maybe I was manifesting, if that's your thing, if you're into manifesting. But invariably, they would go in, they would spot check. Hey, can you show us this? Can you show us this related to this particular grant? In my case, since I was supplying information for institutional giving, invariably, they would ask for some $2,500 family foundation grant. They want to see the grant agreement. They want to see this and that, or anything that came along with it. And I would just, inside, it's just like, because I knew that for a lot of these gifts, and every single one of them helped feed more people or helped make someone who helped empower someone with a disability to live a full life and access all the things that we all want, right? I mean, every donation, every grant built toward that purpose. But some of the smaller scale grants from smaller family foundations, and even sometimes some corporate grants, kind of just came with a check and an envelope, right? And no other documentation. So it became me searching, well, let me pull this, let me print out the grant, let me print this out, let me do this, let me get this. I just have those memories of, I know that they were asking random things because that's just what they did. And I did not take it personally, but I just had this hurry up and wait, I'm going to scramble for documentation kind of sinking feeling every year. So, yeah.
That was about my experience too. So,
yeah.
Probably my wildest audit story is showing up the first day on a new job and learning that my position, because I was the first grants administrator they had ever hired at the city, that they actually had created the position because long before my interview, they had been audited by the Office of the Inspector General, or the OIG, and had lots of findings. And so one of the ways they cleared out some of those findings was by creating a grants position. So these things wouldn't happen in the past. And they didn't bother to inform me of that when I interviewed or when they offered me the job, or it was just the first day on the job that I found out all about this fun stuff. So I won't go into all the details because that's a whole long sordid story.
Yeah.
I told that story way back. Let's go back in time, Kimberly. Done that a while. Way back in season 2 of the episode. I'll put a link in the show notes. So if you haven't listened to the How I Survived an OIG Audit, you can certainly go back and check that out and relive that fun-filled experience with me.
Also, new question unlocked during a job interview.
Right.
Has your agency ever been under any sort of formal audit by the Office of Inspector General? And if so, what happened? I mean, fair. That's legitimate. Years ago, I took a job that I didn't choose to stay at that organization very long because I did not think to ask the question, and it was not offered. Are you actually going to announce a merger with another organization that I may not exactly want to work with in the month after I took the job? That's all I'm going to say. And it's okay. And that organization has gone on and they've done wonderful things, but sometimes things just aren't a good fit for different reasons. And I was like, y'all could have just trotted that out. Yeah. Couldn't you? But I'm like, but it's like, so we are talking about audits today, but I would just like to drop in that advice from my learned experiences.
Fair.
If people say, do you have any questions? And you can't think of anything, hey, ask them about their, what's up with the audit? You have an audit history? What have y'all done when things have come da-da-da-da-da? You can ask those questions. And if they're cagey or refuse to answer or don't want to talk about it, and you're being hired in a revenue-generating position, i.e. fundraising, grant writing, some permutation of that, let's think about it. Because like Amanda, they may bring you in to clean things up that you didn't know, or you may or may not want to clean up, because just because you can do something doesn't mean that you want or have to do that thing. But anyway, so we're not talking about audits from the OIG, as Amanda explained, and as I said at the top of the hour, but we want to focus on two different types of audits that have maybe slightly different definitions, whether you're local government or nonprofit, or at the very least, slightly different vocabulary to refer to that. So I kind of want to break that down for us in a minute, and we'll talk to that. But just how to be better prepared as a grant professional, as a fundraiser, as an executive director or program director, if you're listening and you're new to your position. Especially, we are gonna slap that focus on, especially if you're an organization receiving federal funds, because that is sort of a new level unlocked, if you will, for documentation and tracking requirements when it comes to that.
Very true. So that's right. So today we're specifically covering kind of definitions and explaining why you need either an annual audit and or a single audit. And so we're going to start off with an annual audit. And Kimberly's going to kick us off with that one.
So annual audit, that's where I spent lots of my time, during an annual audit, running around trying to find some phantom piece of paper that I knew didn't exist, and then finding other ways to prove that, yes, we did receive this grant from this family foundation that doesn't send a grant agreement, and here we are, and here it goes, and here are the things. That was an annual audit. And I want to go through some definitions, but if you're like, what does she mean? You may know it more by the annual audit is the process that produces your audited financial statements. And so that may ring a bell, right? So we're going to break it down. Many funders, if you're a nonprofit of a certain size, and by size, I mean budget, many funders, public government funding and private funders, family foundations, United Ways, community foundations, corporate foundations, might require, in fact, usually do, might require your most current audited financials, which is usually what they call it, as a condition of the application. Like, you got to upload it in the portal. You got to be this tall to ride that ride. Later on, we can get into what are some workarounds. And many funders do provide those, but for a lot of them, they're like, you got to have audited financials or you can't apply. But basically, a thumbnail definition is it's an organized review of your organization's financial records by either a single licensed CPA, which stands for Certified Public Accountant, or a firm of CPAs. Usually for large organizations, it's going to be a firm. And the Council of Nonprofits, a great organization. Get on LinkedIn. They're gonna keep you informed. They just really do an excellent job. But besides that, they also provide some standard definitions of things, and they define an independent audit, AKA regular independent audit, the thing that produces your audited financials, as an examination of the financial records, accounts, business transactions, accounting practices, and internal controls of a charitable nonprofit by an independent auditor. Independent means that either the firm or the CPA is not an employee of your organization. Kind of like having a third-party evaluator come in, right? For larger grants where it makes sense, having a third party. And it's a contract and not an employee-employer relationship. So you may be wondering, why do we have to have these to begin with? And I'm like, I get you, but I'm also like, I'm usually not the one that comes out in favor of different rules and regs and all these requirements and documents and blah, blah, blah. Actually, I'm kind of down with this one because it's uniform. And for private funding, it sure is nice to have a uniform document that's accepted by everyone. You know what I mean? And whether you are navigating job seeking or grant seeking or just checking out, or perhaps even looking to become a supporter of a nonprofit. One way to check out, are they okay, is not looking at what's their overhead. This is not that podcast. Don't even get me started on the bullshittery of that as the primary rule by which you judge an organization. Setting that aside, if you're able to just look at some financials and see, year to year, because usually audit financials come in, it's usually the most currently closed fiscal year and the one before that, they're comparative tables. You can just get a picture of what's going on. And again, if there are organizations, whether as an employer, grant maker, grant seeker, whatever, supporter, that don't have any kind of financial information readily available to show you in any way, shape, or form, that have been around for a while and actually have a staff. I'm not talking about your faith community's food pantry that's, part of that institution's budget. But if people are cagey about wanting to show you those things, again, that can be a red flag. So one of the reasons to have one is just your organization's commitment to financial transparency. And also, you've got the board, it should want these audited financials from a third party, because then they might issue findings if they're looking at something and like, hey, you might want to tighten up on this, or we've noticed that you don't seem to have a procedure in place about and this kind of internal control or whatever it might be. It's valuable information, and it can help make your organization stronger, which in turn not only helps you do better work, which is the most important thing, but also it's going to build your organization's reputation for integrity and transparency and professionalism. All important things, whether you're seeking a grant, seeking a supporter, seeking employees, working in your community, and also for larger scale interactions with banks and other financial institutions. It's a report about your organization's credit worthiness, basically if you're looking for loans or grants, it's a way for the reviewing organization to take a look at, okay, what are they pretty good at managing their money? Are there huge gaps? Are there giant leaps back and forth? Were there multiple findings, which to me would indicate you may have an administrative issue that needs to be resolved? And also, as I said at the start of the definitions, funders ask for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, simply put. Is there any reason why an organization would not conduct an annual audit? Because it sounds like a good thing, right?
It's mainly a good thing, but it's not cheap. Yeah. And so, I'm going to say an annual org budget number, but I don't mean that it's hard and fast and hold me to it. Yeah. But generally speaking, if you are either working or volunteering or consulting with a nonprofit agency, and again, I'm just talking right now about nonprofit. I know, Amanda, you're going to chime in about local government and all the things, because that's where you cut your teeth, right? You have a depth of experience there to share. But if generally, allegedly, any other Lee I can think of, if the annual budget is maybe less than $250,000, all in organizational budget, it may not be a good investment, because number one, you're probably not going to be eligible for those. From the grant seeking perspective, you're not going to be eligible for those larger grants. Mm-hmm. Like if it's a grant for $100,000, or $150,000 or $200,000 and your entire budget is $200,000. Sure, I know that there's some agencies out there that have gotten funding that way, but they're the exception rather than the rule. Like, that's just so it might just not be cost effective because it could be tens of thousands of dollars for an audit. Especially in this economy, that may not be the best choice if you have a smaller scale budget. But you can still do some other things. And I'm thinking of several community foundations I've applied to over the years that will have even two different tiers. There's a United Way in another city that has sort of two different tiers of application processes: above annual budgets above $1 million and below $1 million. And below $1 million, they'll ask for a financial review, which is you have an independent auditor, an accountant, maybe reviewing your financial statements to see if they're consistent with generally accepted accounting practices. But they're just looking for big deviations. They're not examining internal controls and pulling individual files or asking for those individual files, either virtually or hard copies. And it's just sort of an overview versus really digging in the weeds audit, right?
Audit light.
I would say, yeah, audit light, audit-esque, and a financial compilation could be another, kind of like year-end financials that are presented to the board. And those may be done internally, and for smaller organizations, they usually are, or whatever you're working with, where you have someone, a qualified someone, compile financial records in a way that you can look at income and expenses, profit and loss, and you're just wanting to make sure that there's nothing. Again, it's an informal overview just to make sure that you are on the up and up. So again, it's something that usually the board might use to then decide on the budget for next year. So it's kind of like sitting down and doing your household, income and expenses kinds of things. And not every state requires local governments. For example, I mentioned a few minutes ago, Amanda, that you know a lot, will have a lot more lived experience with that. Not every state requires local governments, cities, counties, villages, towns, parishes, et cetera, to conduct annual audits. But in my opinion, I think it will be worth it because, again, local government, you want to make sure that you're being transparent with the residents and citizens you serve about where their tax money is going. Yeah. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out.
Most local governments tend to do it, but it's kind of like you said, a lot of people, when they think government, they think huge, but there are plenty of, towns or villages that maybe have a population of 500 people and their tax base may be teeny, right? They may, and I know there's a local government here in the county where I work that they have one employee. They have mayor, council, and one employee because they're so tiny. They don't, and they most of their services are through consultants or they use the county to provide services. And so, for them, they're probably not getting grants because they're not writing them because they're doing just the basic things that need to be done. So it's kind of on the same scale as nonprofits. Like, do you need it? Is it necessary? What is the money worth it in the long run?
And a lot of it has to do, again, with the size of your annual operating budget. And there's that's just what it is.
Yeah. So how do you know if an audit is required? Because if it's required, you want to make sure you're doing it, right?
Well, it does. Yes. First off, if you are consistently seeing that you are unable to apply for grants for which you think you are qualified, and you're thinking this through because you're not just chasing some money, because they ask for a copy of your most recent audited financials and they don't offer any other workaround, which is more common than you might think, then it's time to educate up and help senior leadership understand if you want to play in this bigger sandbox, we're going to have this documentation, and it seems to be non-negotiable based on the last 10 or 20 grants that I've researched, for example. Sure. When you get to a certain level of applying for grants, it's just they want audited financials like they want a copy of your 501c3 if you're a nonprofit, right? That's just is what it is. it's usually spelled out from the get-go in either, if the organization's big enough to have grant instructions that we would refer to as an RFP or a NOFO or something like that, or if they just list it out on a web page that talks about applying for their grant, you'll know. And if for some reason they don't spell it out and there's an online portal and you get in and you'll see that that's what they want, I mean, shame on them for not making it clear, but you'll know, and you won't be able to submit the application.
Yeah.
But if you are working for a local government in any permutation that might be, you need to check with your state to see if it's required. So I can talk about the state of Georgia. It requires, and again, every state is different. Local governments, could be municipalities, cities, counties. They require that local governments must conduct an annual audit. But Amanda, like you were saying, if you're like a one-woman show of a local government county employee and the annual expenses, for example, for that county or that city don't exceed, in the state of Georgia, $550, then
$550,000. Yeah.
550,000. Sorry, I misspoke. There are alternatives. The state has some alternatives. So basically look and see what your state requires. And most often you can Google state of X annual audit requirements.
Yep.
And it should pop right up. And so a lot of times that information might live on the Secretary of State's.
In Georgia, it was on the Department of Revenue, I believe.
Could be Department of Revenue, which also lives under.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Yep. Okay. So we've established what an annual audit is, why organizations have them, and whether or not they're required. So let's move on to single audits. Okay. So
single audits. I'm sorry. I'm not going to sing the song. Go ahead. Just go ahead.
Why not? We like to sing on this podcast.
I'm good. I'm done. Go ahead.
So a single audit, this is applicable if you receive federal funds. So if you never receive any federal money in any way, shape, or form, then you don't have to worry about it, right? But a single audit is required if your agency spends $1 million or more in federal funds during your agency's fiscal year. Okay, so I'm not saying if you were awarded more than $1 million, but if you actually spend $1 million or more.
It doesn't have to be in just grants either. It could be
I'm about to
cooperative agreements,
all the things. It's a lot of things. Yep. So it's known as a single audit. Some other people talk about program specific audit. It was previously called the A133 audit. So if you've been around long enough, you may remember that. It was called A133 because that was the name of the code section for the audit. But then when they, back in 2019, whenever they brought all of the sections together for 2 CFR Part 200, and it became the super circular because it used to be like 5 different documents and they put everything together in one place under 2 CFR Part 200. So now it's not, you don't have a separate A133 document. It's now part of the uniform guidance. So that's when it got called the single audit on a regular basis, right? If you want to read all about it, you can find the single audit section in 2 CFR Part 200. It's specifically in subpart F, audit requirements, which starts in section 200.500 of the uniform guidance. So I'll put a link in the show notes directly to that. So if you can't sleep tonight, or if you just really want to know all the ins and outs of single audit, that's where you can go. And so as Kimberly was saying earlier, federal money, in my world, I was only thinking of grants to begin with, because that's what I deal with. But really, you get federal money from a lot of things, right? It can be grants, cooperative agreements, cost reimbursement contracts under the FAR, which is the federal. I always forget.
Oh, you know how much I suck at acronyms. Don't make me do this.
Oh, I'm not going to remember now, but the FAR, that's what sets the different levels of things. And maybe you can Google that while I'm saying all the other things. Right?
I'm on it. Go ahead. I'm on it.
Contracts with Indian tribes and also direct appropriations. So if you applied for what we now call congressionally directed spending, that is an appropriation. And if you get money directly through appropriations, then that's federal money, right? That's pretty typical. A lot of people do think about those things, but it can also be disbursements of funds to subrecipients. So if you receive federal funds, even if you're not keeping them, but you're dispersing them to a subrecipient, that still counts. And Kimberly is telling me she knows what FAR stands for.
Federal Acquisition Regulation.
Yes, thank you. Federal Acquisition Regulation.
Ding, ding.
That's the FAR. So if you have a contract through FAR, that's federal money. If you have loan proceeds under loan and loan guarantee programs, if you received federal property, including surplus property, because sometimes when the federal government has surplus, you can buy at a discount. I know, especially a lot of times public safety will purchase things. I've seen school systems that have bought, computers and different things. That's federal awards, right? Distribution or use of food commodities, disbursement of amounts entitling the non-federal entity to an interest subsidy, or a period when insurance is in force, which I don't even know what that means, but that is the list inside the uniform guidance of all the different ways that you could be receiving federal money or things that have a dollar value from the federal government. So you have to add all of those things up to determine if you're over that $1 million threshold or not, to know if you need a single audit.
And if you're driving, don't drive off the road. If you're folding laundry, just put the t-shirt down. It's fine. We're not saying that either one of us had to calculate all these things. Now, that single employee of the city or municipality government, Amanda, that you referred to earlier, maybe she is, right?
Yeah.
But it's a lot to keep up with. And if you are working at an organization complex enough financially to have these multiple streams of revenue, chances are you are not going to be the only one who is painfully aware of this. And that's why I'm always preaching about grant management and grant writing. Nothing grant related is a solo sport, even if you're the only person in your organization with that in your job title. You need input from maybe other people in the fundraising and development team if you're the only grant person there. Finance, definitely program staff and leadership. And I would almost guarantee, unless the organization where you're working is in complete administrative disarray, there are going to be people who are going to be able to do this. Yeah. If for some reason there's been a big old turnover and no one is there, then the new person coming in finance, I'm speaking of, there's been a huge turnover, needs to have a handle on this. And you could suggest, as you build your relationship with that person, it's like, we need to get a handle on this to figure out if we need to have that single audit, which again, different from regular schmegular audited financials, which include all funding sources. The single audit is really focused on federal funds in their many shapes, forms, and permutations.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and remember, your single audit is not separate from your annual audit. So the way it works, you still are hiring that independent auditor, whether it's an individual or a team, to come in and conduct one audit for you. The difference is, when you reach that $1 million federal threshold, they are also, in addition to the regular audit that they're also doing a single audit, which just means they're doing a much deeper dive on grants. Because even during annual audits, I would still have to meet with the auditors. I'd still have to share records and resources. I'd still have to answer questions about grant processes, but not nearly as much as I would when we would have a single audit. And when I worked for 12 years, I worked for the city of Alpharetta, and it almost felt like every other year we ended up with a single audit. So it, or you may be in an agency that it happens every time, or it may just be one banner year and then you don't have it again for the next 20 years. There's no rhyme or, well, there is a rhyme or reason. It all has to do with how much federal money you're spending, right? So it's not always like, oh, I've had it once, I'm going to have it every other time. It just depends. And another thing to know too, we've mentioned about high risk on other episodes. We've talked about your agency could be labeled high risk. This happens when you don't do a very good job of managing your grants, and it's not like you're purposely doing things. No one's been stealing the money. Nobody's been doing anything horrible, but still the funder's like, you need a little more help than most people. We're going to label you high risk. You're still eligible to apply for and receive grants. It's just going to be harder. And it's letting every other funder understand that you might need some more handholding. So if you are a high risk agency and you have a single audit, the auditors are required to look at a higher percentage of your grants than they are of people who are not high risk agencies, right? So
even more time pulling needed and requested documentation together. Yay!
Yep, that thing.
So I had alluded a little bit earlier about, chances are you won't be figuring this out by yourself, whether or not you need a single audit, but I know that you are going to take us through exactly what is needed to determine whether or not the single audit needs to happen along with your regularly scheduled audit.
Mm-hmm. So again, because you're using the same auditing firm you're hiring, you're going to have to give them a heads up like, oh, by the way, it's not just an annual audit this year, it's also a single audit. So you kind of need to know before they show up, right? Which oftentimes where I work, they usually showed up a couple of months after our fiscal year end closed. And so what would happen for me, where I worked, we ran a July 1 to June 30 budget year was our annual fiscal year. So usually in early April, the folks from finance who handled the audit side of things would always be like, hey, what do you think, Amanda? Single audit this year or not? And so I would start the document that we called the SEFA, S-E-F-A. It's the Schedule of Expenditure of Federal Awards. And it was just a Excel spreadsheet that I listed every single grant we received that was federal money. So either directly from the feds, or if it's maybe I had a state grant that originated from federal government, went to the state and then went to us. So you can't just go, oh, it's only from federal funders. No, if the money started with the feds, it has to be on that list, right? So I would start that grant list. And then not only, okay, here's all the grants we have open that are federal, but then figuring out how much money have we actually spent that we're eligible, even if they haven't paid us back yet, but the money we've spent that we are eligible for reimbursement or they have already paid us for. And then you add that column up. Now, again, it wasn't just me. Then they would also have to check, because a lot of times we would get, stuff from the feds through our police department. Sometimes if there was big, like we would participate on a joint task force that were raiding, some drug kingpin or whatever. And so we might end up with a few vehicles or things like that. So those kinds of things would also, so I would start the document. Finance would then, look around and see if there was anything else from that list. Do we have any loans? Do we have any of these other things? And so we put everything on the list and you'd add it up. And if that total is $1 million or more, then having a single audit. If it's not, then no. But of course, doing it in April, sometimes I'd be like, well, we're like $10,000 away and I know what's coming because I keep an eye on all my grants. So we're probably going to end up crossing that threshold. And also know that number has changed over the years, right? When I first started working, the threshold was $500,000. About 15 years ago, it bumped up to $750,000. And just about a year and a half ago, it bumped up to $1 million. So they do continue, as the prices of things go up. And so, eventually one day that number may be bigger. But for now, $1 million is that threshold. And again, you need to let your auditor know, and you also need to understand it's going to cost you more money because a single audit, they're digging in deeper. So it's going to take the auditors more time. So they're going to charge you more than they would for a regular audit.
Another factor to consider when you are thinking about, hey, we want to bump up and go after state and federal grants. It's something we've never considered before. Yep. I feel like the additional cost of audit is something that's rarely included in that cost benefit analysis of, if we step up, it will cost us this much. And it's an important consideration. Yeah.
Now, something to note, though, is there's two ways you could potentially use federal money to pay for a single audit. One is it could be if you are using indirect, if you're getting indirect, the single audit could be part of your indirect expenses potentially. And so that could be a way to help pay for that expense. Or if you are an agency that maybe you got one mega grant and that grant alone brought in $1 million. And so the only reason you need a single audit is because of that one grant, you could actually charge. Now you'd have to know this at the beginning because you'd have to write it into your budget. But according to uniform guidance, you are allowed to have a direct line item for a single audit if there is just one grant that you will be spending $1 million or more during a year to pay for it. So those are two ways that you got to know about that, and you've got to kind of plan ahead. So
also beautifully illustrating another sermonette that I often deliver, which is how grant management post and pre-award need to work together from the get-go, because that needs to be written into the grant budget and addressed that way. And you can't come back later and go, but it's got to be, that's why there doesn't need to be that separation.
No.
If you're a larger organization and you're putting together grants, and maybe you're the grant writer, and then there's finance has the grant manager or administration, wherever it lives, you need to talk to one another, because that's an important thing to put in. There's a lot. This is an area that is rife with little understandings and nuggets of knowledge, just like that one, or the fact that state funds that are passed through federal funds also count in the determination of whether or not you'll have a single audit, along with your regularly scheduled annual audit. But there's a lot more we can go into, and we're exploring ways to address this in season 10, which we are going to be talking about. And we also didn't think that anyone wanted a 3-hour episode on audits. So I'm just going to put that out there. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's so much more we can talk about audits, which we will do in future episodes. So if you have any specific audit related details, questions, whatever you want to learn about, please, we love it when folks email us and say, hey, we'd love more information about this. So you can send us an email at hello@haydayservices.com. We're always happy to give the people what they want. So
some of the things they want, because Amanda's the nice one, y'all. Don't sleep on that. Thanks again to today's sponsor, Grant Guru. If you want to learn more about this incredible new tool to the grant prospect research market, visit grantguru.com/US. You'll find the link in our show notes.
And remember, they are providing a 20% off discount code on your subscription. So when you go to make your purchase, enter the code HayDay 963. That's HayDay 963.
So while I would not say that audits are an incredibly exciting, stellar memory, a career memory that I will take with me, they're vital to making sure that whether you're a nonprofit or a school system, hospital, local government, or another agency that deals with either taxpayer money, grants from private foundations, donations, it's just an intrinsic part of making sure that your agency or your organization or your client, that everyone's being good stewards of the funds entrusted to them to help transform the communities they serve.
Yep, very true. So as always, we are so honored you chose to spend time with us today. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks, where we are going to do our follow-up. A few episodes ago, we talked about getting the information you need for grant proposals, and we promised a part 2 with more details, because that was just a much bigger episode than we thought it was going to be. So we are making good on that promise, and we'll continue to talk about getting that helpful information.
We got tips and tricks. But until next time, listen, thanks for listening, and thanks for doing the hard and rewarding but challenging work that you do. Keep on doing it. We're here for you.